So when you think about retail and hospitality, the vast majority of your workforce, particularly those that are really keen to kind of move around from location to location, are probably going to be an hourly paid employee. And so when you've got two different, legal entities, you're technically not required to add the hours up and say, okay, they've worked over 40 hours or they've worked over 8 hours if they're in California. Now they're due overtime pay. And that's always been one of the kind of the what ifs and one of the pushbacks when we were trying to figure out how can we maybe pilot something. That was always one of those, well, what if they go over 40 hours? What if they go over the threshold and now they're due overtime? And again, I kind of go back to that, but we know what those conditions are, right? It's either 40 hours or 8 or whatever. So that's just math. Like,
Yeah,
that's just right.
yeah. One of the other things too is the alternative is, you mentioned a few scenarios where I can easily see that someone just goes and gets a job at Target and becomes a
For
barista there,
sure.
but also goes to the Starbucks down the street, gets a job there, and they just take whatever shifts works their schedule, and
Yeah.
they combined could probably be working 60 hours in a week,
Yeah.
but it's billed separately. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that person technically, so
And they did that. We had plenty of employees who were, a barista at a Starbucks, a company-owned Starbucks, and they went and got
yeah,
the job at Target to work in the Starbucks location, probably for the Target discount too, but they're working maybe two full-time jobs. So they're getting two W-2s and I just think, gosh, one, they're missing out on some tax advantages in a
yeah,
way, right? They're not getting any sort of overtime compensation. So the two separate organizations are kind of, you know,
they're
uh,
taking the advantage.
they're really getting an advantage here because neither's paying overtime. If they work for Target, and I don't mean to pick on Target, but I don't know at what point are you benefits eligible. Starbucks, at least, if you work over a certain threshold, you're benefits eligible, but that's just one company, right? So again, that's kind of one of those, and maybe that's why it's not desirable to kind of do the cross entity. But I think that if you were an organization like a Hilton, where you own the portfolio of businesses, that's where you might have a real great use case in that we're gonna pay the benefits no matter what, whether the guy works at Embassy Suites or Hampton Inn. At the end of the day, it's all going to hit our bottom line collectively as Hilton. And so that to me makes a little bit more sense in terms of, yeah, I get it, two separate legal entities technically, but at the end of the day, it's the same organization. So, I think that's where there's a really good use case to be made. So, but yeah, the FMLA, or not FMLA, the FLSA component for overtime is really one of those. Like I said, it was a real big pushback, and that, and then again, who pays for it? Which
Mhm.
entity kind of eats it? And that was like, well, again, for the Hilton example, my kind of response back would be, does it really matter? Like if you kind
Yeah.
of reimagine the way of working, does that premium pay really matter in terms of who's going to pay for it? Because that wage expense is all going to hit the same G&A line on your financials when everything rolls up at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I get the reasoning at a corporate level for doing it. It protects them from a lot
Yeah.
of liability. And if like one business closes or gets sued or something, I'm sure it makes a big difference, and for the
Yeah.
overtime thing especially.
Yeah.
But at a
Yeah.
certain point, it does kind of, on the other end of things, it does ultimately make employees, if they do realize, hey, I've worked 60 hours this week and I don't have any overtime,
Yeah.
uh, because of the way this is stupidly set up or whatever. That this, and probably what they're thinking, it does ultimately lead to bad reputation for the organization.
Yeah.
Like, why can't they figure this out? It's so simple. I could figure this out. Kind of,
Yeah.
you can hear, you can imagine the things people will say, because it shouldn't be so complicated. It is
Right.
just like you were saying, kind of a mathematical
Yeah.
issue. And but because of all the laws and the legality of it, it does get a little convoluted on the way to someone just being paid once by the same organization, despite working at a different entity.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there's any solution out there that does offer the capability to do this, or that is kind of inching towards being close to doing it?
I think so with kind of the legal entity piece aside, because I think there's two separate problems to or challenges or opportunities to address. One is I work for, Hilton as the example. My paycheck says Hilton. I work at an Embassy Suites, right? But at the end of the day, in their mind, I work for Hilton. So I think that, but the multi-entity thing, I think though, if you park that and just look at maybe like the border crossing component, or just the differences in jurisdiction, and it's the same legal entity, but I've got like the Kansas City Royals, right? So Kansas City Royals, no matter which state they're playing in. But the taxation and the reporting will vary based upon the state. And so that piece, I think I have seen timekeeping systems that do have the functionality where you can add different locations for an individual. And you could even go so far in some of even the HR systems to say, I need to apportion X% of wages from this time frame, like here's a start and stop date for the individual. But trying to do that at wholesale at scale, I have yet to see. And so I think the tech exists in different components, in disparate components today. I think I have yet to see the technology that lets you kind of combine the two and be able to do it at scale. I think in those industries where it makes sense, professional sports being one of them, or if you are a mass consulting firm and that's, your bread and butter and you're sending people out on the road all the time, I've yet to see that. It's more of the onesie twosie. You've got an exception and you've got somebody you're sending away out of state to stand up a new location for 3 months. It's a short-term assignment kind of situation. So it's very uh, almost manual, if you will, because the intention by the product is really you're going to do it kind of once every now and again for one or two people. It's not your whole industry is sort of reliant or based upon people moving around from location to location. So the tech I think is there for that, but the tracking piece, it's the intake, it's the notification. If I'm not a Major League Baseball team and I don't know the schedule in advance where the people are supposed to be at any given point in time during the season, and it's maybe more consultative in nature and you have people that kind of pick and choose, there has to be some sort of trigger somewhere to say, I'm going to be in South Carolina for the next 2 weeks. Like, where does that come from? Does that come from the employee? It probably could, but now you're relying upon a human being to take some sort of action. And we have very short attention spans, and we are not, and I haven't seen the stats lately, but when I worked for Amazon many years ago, we went through this interesting exercise about at how many clicks in to searching for something are you going to just abandon your search. It wasn't that many clicks. It was like 3 click, click, click. I can't find it. I walked away. I imagine now it's less than 3 clicks. So if I'm an employee and I can't do something instant, simple, intuitive, I'm probably not going to do it, or you're going to have to remind me, which now kind of removes the idea that the power sort of in the employee's hands, if you will. So I other than again the low jacking them or putting a bracelet on them,
Well,
that's the
you,
tricky part.
you bring up an interesting thing because we talked to another head of payroll for a major manufacturer, and he was telling us stories of how he found out through his managers that someone had moved to a completely different state,
Oh
had
yeah.
been there for 4 or 6 months, and nobody had an idea. It wasn't until like something didn't get delivered to their house that they found out and uncovered
Yeah.
that they were literally working and living in a completely different state. It's what for the employees, if it's not top of mind, if they don't really understand the ramifications, they don't care about it. They don't
No.
understand that there's downstream effects.
Yeah. I think that's the tricky part too. Every organization I've supported, there's this big push towards the end of the calendar year. We got to get a comms out to the employees and say, hey, if you moved, got married, had a baby, had some sort of life event, come check all your data. Maybe you need to update your data. And, sometimes that worked. You did have people who would go, oh, yeah, I forgot. Yeah, I did move, or I changed my last name, or, something to that effect. But that's not uncommon. We just went through, we're getting close to tax, filing date here in the US, and Canada's isn't far behind. And inevitably, once W-2s are available, that's when you start to get the notifications. Well, my W-2 says I live in Texas. Yeah, because the system says you live in Texas. Oh no, I moved to New York. Great. Now we have a few different issues that have to be addressed, but they don't, they're just getting paid the same. It's direct deposit. They're not thinking about it. And so I think, we can try to find ways to beat people over the head to say, you have a responsibility. And yeah, there's some level of response. If you've been in the workforce for more than a few years, right, you're an adult, like there's some things that you should proactively communicate with your employer. But the reality is people don't, they're busy doing their job that you've hired them to do. So that's where, we've tried to get creative at Pearson. Like, do we find a way to nudge people? Like, is there an outbound nudge that we do periodically, maybe every other month, once a quarter? Like, hey, have you had a life event? Have you moved? But I have yet to kind of crack the code on what will it take. um, and when you think about individuals that are fairly new in career as well, like when I was young, right, I was broke. So what did I do? I would hop from apartment to apartment every 6 months. You'd get the manager's move-in special where they would waive first and last month's rent, right? You maybe a deal on security deposit, live there. I didn't own anything. I had a couch and like a bed, and that was it, and my cat. And after a couple of months, you'd be driving around town and see manager special. I could fit everything I owned in my car. I would move almost every 6 months. I stayed in the same general area, but I moved all the time because it's what I could afford, and it enabled me to save money. At least in my mind, I thought I was saving money. And I know we have people that continue to kind of do that, until they get a little bit more established or a little bit more rooted. But there's a part of me that almost just accepts that, like, look, we know the addresses are going to be wrong. If I had to put money on it, how many, if I were to say what's the percentage of employees at any given employer that has more than 1,000 employees, multi-state, how many of them actually are live at the address that we have on file? I don't know, maybe 60%. I would say maybe more than half, but probably not much more.
Wow, that's crazy. I feel like the only way to maybe do it would be to have your home address having to match up with at very least the state your driver's license or something is issued in. Kind
Yeah.
of like in Europe, how like they have those ID cards, uh, for the country or like whatever that says maybe whatever city they live in.
Yeah.
Since not
Yeah.
everyone, I feel like driver's license are a little less common over there. But it would have to be something. I know where I live in New York City. You have to have your ID changed within 3 months of living here. I feel like
Mhm.
that's also pretty standard.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but there's always going to be. I feel like it is kind of the American way to kind of cheat the system. So it is going to be, and I get it. There's a million political reasons why people feel that's necessary,
Yeah.
but I think at a certain point, if you say you live in Texas but you work in New York, there has to be some sort of harmonization there because yeah, you're not going to get the benefits you want that are probably better in New York, though you
Yeah.
may get the income tax, or a lack of income tax by saying you live in Texas.
Oh, for sure.
But I guess it would have to lead to, I guess, a complete overhaul of the tax policy of the United States,
Yeah.
but which I'm sure we'll solve tonight. But but